My millionaire stepmother forced me to marry a humble farmer. She was shocked when I never thought I'd find myself here, standing in the middle of a dusty farmyard, my designer shoes sinking into the mud. The irony isn't lost on me. Olivia Hartley, once the darling of New York's elite, now reduced to this. But let me start from the beginning, for you to understand how I ended up in this predicament. My name is Olivia, and until recently, I lived a life most people only dream of. The only daughter of business tycoon Edward Hartley, I grew up in a world of privilege and luxury. Our penthouse overlooking Central Park was my kingdom, and New York City was my playground. I had everything a girl could want. The best education, designer clothes, exotic vacations, and a future as bright as the diamonds adorning my neck. But all that changed when my father passed away unexpectedly. The day I lost him, I lost more than just a parent. I lost my anchor, my protector, and my best friend. The void he left behind was immeasurable, and in my grief I failed to see the vultures circling, waiting to pick at the remains of my life. Enter Victoria, my stepmother, a woman who had waltzed into our lives 5 years ago, all smiles and charm, capturing my father's heart with her beauty and wit. I never fully warmed up to her, but for my father's sake, I tolerated her presence. Now with him gone, the mask had slipped, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. "Olivia, darling." Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness as she cornered me in the study one dreary afternoon. "We need to talk about your future." I remember standing there surrounded by my father's belongings, his presence still lingering in the air. "What about my future?" I asked, my guard immediately up. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers trailed along the edge of my father's mahogany desk. "Your father and I had concerns about you, dear. Your lifestyle, your spending habits. We felt you needed to learn the value of hard work and humility." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What are you talking about? Dad never said anything like that to me." "Oh, but he did to me," she countered, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "In fact, we had made arrangements that now that he's gone, I feel obligated to carry out." My heart raced as I listened to her words, each one feeling like a nail in the coffin of my former life. Victoria went on to explain that she had found a suitable match for me, a farmer in rural Pennsylvania who was struggling to keep his family's land. The deal: I would marry him, move to the farm, and learn to live a simpler life. "This is insane," I exploded, my voice echoing in the large room. "You can't force me to marry someone I've never met. I'm 25, for God's sake." Victoria's smile never faltered, but her eyes turned to ice. "Oh, but I can, dear Olivia. You see, your father left me in charge of the estate until you, and I quote, demonstrate the maturity and responsibility befitting a Hartley. Unless you want to challenge the will and risk losing everything, you'll do as I say." I felt the floor shifting beneath my feet. This couldn't be happening. "You're bluffing," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Victoria pulled out a folder from the desk drawer. "Perhaps you'd like to see the documents yourself, or maybe you'd prefer I start digging into the circumstances of your birth. I'm sure the press would have a field day with any inconsistencies we might find." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I knew Victoria well enough to know she wasn't bluffing. Whatever game she was playing, she held all the cards. "You have a week to prepare," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I suggest you start packing. Oh, and Olivia, do try to look at this as an opportunity. After all, isn't it every girl's dream to marry a handsome farmer?" With that parting shot, she left me alone in the study, my world crumbling around me. The next week passed in a blur of disbelief and desperation. I reached out to every lawyer I knew, searched for loopholes, even considered running away. But Victoria's grip on my inheritance was ironclad, and her threats of exposing some hidden truth about my birth terrified me. What if there was something I didn't know? What if challenging her meant losing not just my wealth, but my very identity? And so here I am, a reluctant bride being shipped off to rural Pennsylvania like some sort of mail-order heiress. The drive from New York to the farm was silent, with Victoria occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror, her satisfaction palpable. As we pulled up to the weathered farmhouse, I got my first glimpse of my new home. The two-story structure had seen better days, its white paint peeling in places, the porch sagging slightly. Fields stretched out as far as the eye could see, dotted with cows and the occasional tractor. And there, standing on the porch, was him, my soon-to-be husband, Lucas Foster. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-kissed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He looked as uncomfortable as I felt, tugging at the collar of what was clearly his best shirt. "Remember, Olivia," Victoria hissed as we got out of the car. "Smile, you're meeting your future husband." I plastered on my best society smile, the one I'd perfected at countless galas and charity events. But inside, I was screaming. How had my life come to this? Forced into marriage with a stranger, torn from everything I knew and loved. As I took those first steps towards Lucas Foster and the farmhouse beyond, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just Victoria's twisted idea of teaching me humility. There was something else at play here, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but one thing was certain: I, Olivia Hartley, was not going down without a fight. If Victoria thought she could break me with mud and manure, she had another thing coming. I would endure this farce of a marriage, uncover whatever secrets she was hiding, and reclaim my life. Little did I know, as I shook Lucas's calloused hand and stepped into the farmhouse, that this journey would change me in ways I could never have imagined. The challenges ahead would test every fiber of my being, force me to confront truths about myself and my family, and perhaps, just perhaps, lead me to discover a kind of happiness I never knew existed. But for now, as I watched Victoria's sleek car disappear down the dusty driveway, taking with it the last vestiges of my old life, all I could do was take a deep breath and prepare for the battle ahead. The war for my future had just begun, and I was determined to emerge victorious no matter the cost. The first week at Foster Farm felt like being thrown into a foreign country without a map or translator. Everything about this place challenged my understanding of what life should be. The rooster's crow replaced my gentle wake-up playlist, and the smell of fresh manure overtook my cherished Jo Malone perfumes. But perhaps the most unsettling change was Lucas Foster himself. I expected a rough, uneducated farmer who would lord this arrangement over me. Instead, I found myself living with a quiet, intelligent man who seemed just as trapped as I was. During our first breakfast together, sitting at his worn kitchen table, he finally broke the uncomfortable silence that had stretched between us since the rushed civil ceremony the day after my arrival. "Look, Olivia," he said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle, "I know neither of us chose this situation. Your stepmother made certain promises regarding the farm's debt if I agreed to this marriage. I won't pretend to understand the full scope of what's happening, but I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you beyond maintaining appearances." I studied him over my coffee cup, black because the farm didn't stock my usual oat milk. "Why did you agree to this arrangement? Surely there were other ways to handle your financial problems." Lucas's eyes clouded over, and he stared out the kitchen window at the fields beyond. "This land has been in my family for 4 generations. My father..." He paused, collecting himself. "Before he fell ill, he made me promise to keep it going. When your stepmother approached me with this proposition, I was about to lose everything to the bank." Something in his voice resonated with my own loss, and for the first time since arriving, I felt a flicker of connection. We were both pawns in Victoria's game, though I still couldn't understand her endgame. "There's something else," Lucas added, hesitating. "About 6 months ago, your father visited this farm." The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hands. "What? Dad was here? Why?" "He showed up unannounced, said he was surveying local farms for potential investment opportunities. But looking back, something felt off. He seemed distracted, worried even, worried. We talked for hours about farming, family legacies, and the importance of protecting what matters most." My mind raced with questions. Why hadn't Dad mentioned this visit? What was he really doing here? Before I could press further, Lucas's farmhand, Mike, burst through the door with news about a problem with the irrigation system. "I have to handle this," Lucas said, standing up. "But Olivia, if you want to understand what's really going on here, maybe start by looking around. Your father seemed particularly interested in the old barn records." That conversation sparked something in me, a purpose. While Lucas worked the fields, I began exploring the farm, particularly the musty old barn office where decades of records were stored. I told myself I was just keeping busy, but deep down I knew I was searching for answers about my father's mysterious visit. Days turned into weeks, and despite my initial resistance, I found myself falling into the rhythm of farm life. My designer clothes gave way to practical jeans and boots. My manicured hands grew calloused from helping with simple tasks. Lucas proved to be a patient teacher, never mocking my city girl awkwardness, as I learned to collect eggs without screaming at the chickens or drive the small tractor without stalling. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of helping with the harvest, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Lucas joined me, offering a glass of homemade lemonade. "You surprised me today," he said, settling beside me. "Most people wouldn't expect an heiress to spend hours helping sort vegetables for the farmer's market." I surprised myself by laughing. Most people wouldn't expect an heiress to be forced into marrying a farmer either. I guess life's full of surprises. Our eyes met, and for a moment something shifted in the air between us. Lucas quickly looked away, clearing his throat. "I found something today that might interest you. An old ledger from around the time your father visited. There are some unusual entries." Before he could continue, my phone buzzed with Victoria's name flashing on the screen. My stomach clenched. She had taken to calling regularly, supposedly to check on my progress in learning humility. But her calls always left me feeling unsettled. "Your weekly check-in?" Lucas asked, his voice hardening slightly at the mention of my stepmother. I nodded, already dreading the conversation. "She's up to something, Lucas. This whole arrangement, it's not just about teaching me a lesson. My father's visit here, the timing of everything, it's all connected somehow. We'll figure it out," he said softly, and I was struck by his use of "we." When had we become a team? As I answered Victoria's call, putting on my best submissive act, I caught Lucas watching me with concern. In just a few weeks, this man I'd been forced to marry had become my closest ally in unraveling the mystery surrounding my father's last months. That night, as I lay in my bedroom, we maintained separate rooms, keeping up the pretense of marriage while respecting each other's space. I couldn't stop thinking about the growing complexity of my situation. I'd come to the farm as a prisoner of circumstance, but now I felt like a detective on the verge of uncovering something significant. The old Olivia would have been counting the days until she could escape back to her privileged life. But something was changing inside me, like a seed taking root in fertile soil. The farm, with its simple rhythms and honest work, was showing me a different kind of wealth than the one I'd grown up with. And Lucas, with his quiet strength and integrity, was proving to be more than just an unwilling participant in Victoria's schemes. As I drifted off to sleep, the sound of crickets replacing the familiar city noise, I made a decision. I would stop playing the role of the reluctant, spoiled heiress. It was time to dig deeper, to understand why my father had really come to this farm and what Victoria was trying so hard to hide. Little did I know the answers would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about my family and myself. As summer gave way to fall, the farm transformed into a canvas of warm hues. The changing landscape mirrored my own internal shift. I was no longer the same Olivia, who had arrived kicking and screaming just a few months ago. My days now revolved around a mixture of farm work and clandestine investigation into my father's past. One crisp October morning, I found myself in the old barn poring over the ledger Lucas had discovered. The faded ink and my father's familiar handwriting made my heart ache with longing, but I pushed aside the emotion to focus on the task at hand. "Anything interesting?" Lucas's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. I gratefully accepted the coffee he offered. "Maybe. There's an entry here about a special reserve that doesn't match any of the crop records. And look at this notation, E.H. Inquiry. That has to be my father." Lucas leaned over my shoulder, his presence warm and oddly comforting. The dates match up with his visit, but why would Edward Hartley be interested in a small farm's special reserve? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Victoria. "Hope you're enjoying playing farmer. Remember our agreement. Your inheritance hangs in the balance." I showed the message to Lucas, my frustration boiling over. "She's toying with me. There has to be more to this than just teaching me humility. Why this farm? Why you?" Lucas's blue eyes clouded with concern. "I've been wondering the same thing. The amount she offered to cover the farm's debts, it's far more than this place is worth." A thought struck me. "Lucas, what if the farm itself isn't the real target? What if there's something here that Victoria wants? or something she wants to keep hidden. Our eyes met, a spark of understanding passing between us. Whatever game Victoria was playing, we were done being pawns. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and I threw ourselves into investigating every inch of the farm. We combed through old records, explored every abandoned outbuilding, and even began carefully questioning long-time neighbors about my father's visit. Our search yielded little until one rainy afternoon when we were clearing out an old storage shed. As Lucas moved a heavy trunk, a floorboard beneath it creaked suspiciously. "Wait," I said, kneeling down to examine it. With trembling fingers, I pried up the loose board. Beneath it lay a dusty envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting. My heart pounding, I opened it and began to read aloud. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I pray that you found your way to Foster Farm and to Lucas. There are truths you need to know, truths I should have shared long ago. Victoria is not who she claims to be. She came into our lives with an agenda, one that threatens not just our family's legacy, but the lives of many others. The special reserve mentioned in the farm ledgers isn't a crop, it's a hidden cache of documents that could expose Victoria and her associates. I've entrusted Lucas with safeguarding these papers without his knowledge. His family's farm sits on land that once belonged to your great-grandfather. The truth of your heritage and the full extent of your inheritance lie within those documents. Be careful, my darling. Victoria is more dangerous than you know. Trust Lucas. He's a good man, and I believe he can help you uncover the full truth. All my love always, Dad." My hands shook as I finished reading. Lucas stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. "Olivia," he whispered, "I had no idea about any of this." I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision. "We need to find those documents. Whatever they are, they're the key to understanding everything. Why my father really came here, what Victoria's after, and apparently, who I truly am." Lucas nodded, determination replacing the shock in his eyes. "We'll find them. Together." As we stood there in the dusty shed, rain pattering on the roof, I felt a shift in our relationship. We were no longer reluctant partners in an arranged marriage. We were allies in a quest for truth, bound by a secret that could change everything. That night, unable to sleep, I slipped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling under the moonlight. As I breathed in the crisp autumn air, I heard the screen door open behind me. Lucas joined me, draping a warm blanket over my shoulders. Couldn't sleep either. I shook my head. "It's all so overwhelming. I came here thinking I knew who I was, who my family was. Now, I'm not sure of anything." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I know who you are, Olivia. You're strong, determined, and braver than you give yourself credit for. Whatever we uncover, whatever truths come to light, that won't change." His words warmed me more than the blanket. I found myself leaning into him, and his arm instinctively wrapped around me. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight play across the fields. For the first time since my father's passing, I felt a sense of peace. Yes, there were challenges ahead, finding the hidden documents, confronting Victoria, uncovering the truth about my heritage, but I wasn't facing them alone anymore. As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, Lucas and I reluctantly separated. We had work to do. Farm chores wouldn't wait, even for life-altering revelations. But as we prepared to face the day, there was a new energy between us, a shared purpose. "We'll start searching for the documents after breakfast," Lucas said as we headed inside. "Your father must have hidden them somewhere on the property." I nodded, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. "And we need to be careful. If Victoria suspects we're onto her," Lucas's expression hardened. "She won't get away with whatever she's planning, I promise you that." As I watched him head to the kitchen to start coffee, I marveled at how much had changed. The farm I once saw as a prison had become a sanctuary. The man I was forced to marry had become my strongest ally. And the life I thought I wanted had been replaced by something far more meaningful, a quest for truth, justice, and perhaps a love I never expected to find. Little did I know, the revelations waiting for us would test not just our newfound alliance, but the very foundations of everything I believed about love, family, and the true meaning of wealth. The days that followed my father's letter were a whirlwind of activity. Between maintaining the facade of farm life and secretly searching for the hidden documents, Lucas and I barely had a moment to breathe. Every spare second was spent combing through the farmhouse, the barns, and even the fields, looking for any sign of my father's secret cache. Our search was made all the more urgent by Victoria's increasing pressure. Her calls became more frequent, her tone more menacing. It was clear she suspected something was amiss. "Darling Olivia," she purred during one particularly tense call, "I do hope married life is treating you well. You know, I've been thinking it might be time for a visit, to see how you're progressing." I felt my heart race but managed to keep my voice steady. "Oh, that won't be necessary, Victoria. Lucas and I are quite busy with the harvest season." "Nonsense," she replied, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I insist, expect me this weekend." As I ended the call, I found Lucas watching me, concern etched on his face. "Victoria's coming," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We're running out of time." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "We'll find the documents, Olivia. We have to." But as the days passed and our search yielded nothing, I could feel the tension building between us. We were both exhausted, splitting our time between farm work and our clandestine investigation. More than once I caught Lucas looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of concern, admiration, and something else that made my heart skip a beat. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table poring over old farm blueprints, I finally broke down. "What if we're wrong, Lucas? What if there are no documents? What if this is all just some wild goose chase?" Lucas reached across the table, taking my hand in his. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt through me. "Olivia, look at me," he said softly. When I met his gaze, I saw a determination that bolstered my faltering resolve. "Your father wouldn't have left that letter if this wasn't real. We'll find the truth. Together." In that moment, something shifted between us. The pressure of our circumstances, the intimacy of our shared secret, and the growing bond we'd formed over the past months culminated in a tension that was almost palpable. Before I knew what was happening, Lucas leaned in and our lips met in a kiss that took my breath away. For a few blissful seconds, the world fell away. There was no mystery to solve, no Victoria to fear, just Lucas and me and this unexpected connection. But reality crashed back all too quickly as we heard a car pulling up the driveway. We sprang apart, hearts racing for an entirely different reason now. Lucas peered out the window, his expression darkening. "It's Victoria, she's early." Panic surged through me, but I forced it down. We had prepared for this. "Remember the plan?" I whispered to Lucas as we heard Victoria's heels clicking up the porch steps. The door swung open, and there she stood, looking as polished and predatory as ever in her designer suit. "Surprise, darlings," she trilled, her eyes scanning the room, no doubt looking for any sign of our true activities. "Victoria," I greeted, injecting as much warmth into my voice as I could muster. What an unexpected pleasure. Lucas played his part perfectly, the picture of a humble farmer welcoming his wife's stepmother. "Please, come in. Can we offer you some tea?" As we settled in the living room, I could feel Victoria's keen gaze assessing every detail. My, Olivia," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Farm life certainly seems to agree with you. You're practically glowing." I felt a blush creep up my neck, wondering if she had somehow sensed the moment Lucas and I had shared just minutes ago. "It's been enlightening," I replied carefully. Victoria's smile sharpened. "I'm sure it has. You know, I've been thinking. Perhaps it's time we discussed your return to the city. You've clearly learned your lesson about the value of hard work." My heart thundered in my chest. This was it, the moment we'd been preparing for. "Actually, Victoria," I began, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Lucas and I have been talking. We think it might be best if I stay here at least through the winter. There's still so much for me to learn about running a farm." I saw a flicker of something, surprise, anger, cross Victoria's face before her mask of congeniality slipped back into place. "Is that so? How unexpected." Lucas jumped in, his hand finding mine in a gesture that wasn't entirely for show. "Olivia's been a tremendous help here. I don't know how I managed before her." Victoria's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly at our joined hands. "Well, isn't this a charming development? I do hope you remember the terms of our arrangement, Olivia dear. Your inheritance still hangs in the balance." Of course, I replied, squeezing Lucas's hand for support, but I've come to realize that there are more important things than money. The lessons I've learned here, the connection to the land, it's changed me, Victoria, for the better, I think. For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in Victoria's eyes. This clearly wasn't the outcome she had anticipated, but she recovered quickly, her smile turning predatory. How wonderful. In that case, I suppose I should let you two lovebirds get back to your farming. But don't forget, Olivia, I'll be watching closely. As Victoria's car disappeared down the driveway, Lucas and I let out a collective breath. Do you think she bought it? I asked, my voice shaky. Lucas pulled me into a comforting embrace. I don't know, but we've bought ourselves some time. We need to find those documents before she makes her next move. As we stood there, the weight of our situation pressing down on us, I couldn't help but think about the kiss we'd shared. In the midst of all this chaos and danger, something beautiful and unexpected had blossomed. But could we afford to explore it with so much at stake? That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced with thoughts of hidden documents, Victoria's threats, and the feeling of Lucas's lips on mine. Whatever tomorrow brought, one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following Victoria's surprise visit were a delicate balancing act. By day, Lucas and I threw ourselves into the autumn harvest, working side by side in the fields, our hands stained with earth and our backs aching from labor. But every spare moment was devoted to our clandestine search for my father's hidden documents. Our kiss lingered between us, unspoken but ever present. In quiet moments, I'd catch Lucas looking at me with an intensity that made my heart race. But we both knew that pursuing our growing feelings had to take a back seat to the urgent task at hand. It was during a particularly grueling day of harvesting that we finally caught a break. I was helping Lucas repair an old tractor when he suddenly froze, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. "Olivia," he said slowly, "do you see that old oak tree at the edge of the north field?" I squinted against the late afternoon sun. "The one with the odd-shaped branch? What about it?" "I just remembered something your father said when he visited. He mentioned how that tree reminded him of one from his childhood home. Said it was the kind of tree that could keep secrets." My breath caught in my throat. "You think, Lucas was already moving, and I hurried to keep up. As we approached the massive oak, its leaves a riot of red and gold, I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Could this really be it? It took us almost an hour of careful examination before we found it. A small, almost imperceptible seam in the trunk, about 6 feet up. Lucas boosted me onto his shoulders, and with trembling fingers, I pried open the hidden compartment. Inside was a waterproof case. My heart pounding, I pulled it out and climbed down. Lucas and I shared a look of anticipation before I unlatched the case. The documents inside were a treasure trove of information. Financial records, old photographs, and letters revealed a story that left us both reeling. My father hadn't just been a successful businessman. He had been part of a covert operation to expose a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of corporate America. And Victoria? She wasn't just my stepmother. She was a key player in this corrupt network, placed in our family to monitor my father's activities, and ultimately to secure the very documents we now held. But the most shocking revelation came in a letter addressed directly to me, dated just weeks before my father's passing. "My dearest Olivia, the truth I'm about to share will change everything you thought you knew about our family. Your mother, your real mother, was not the woman you grew up believing her to be. She was a fellow investigator, working alongside me to uncover this web of corruption. We fell in love during our mission, and you were born out of that love. To protect you, we made the heartbreaking decision to separate. Your mother continued her work undercover, while I raised you with the help of a trusted friend who posed as your mother. I always intended to tell you the truth when the time was right, but I fear that time may never come. Your real mother's name is Elena Marquez. If I'm gone, she may be the only one who can help you navigate the dangers ahead. Find her, Olivia. She's been watching over you from afar all these years. I'm so sorry for the lies, my darling. Know that everything I've done has been to protect you. You are stronger than you know, and I have faith that you will finish what we started. All my love, Dad." I sat on the ground, the letter clutched to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Lucas knelt beside me, his arm around my shoulders providing silent support as I processed this earth-shattering information. "My whole life has been a lie," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Lucas tightened his hold on me. "Not a lie, Olivia. A protection. Your parents loved you enough to sacrifice everything to keep you safe." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, Lucas and I pored over the rest of the documents. They painted a picture of a vast conspiracy involving insider trading, environmental violations, and even darker crimes. "We need to get these documents to the authorities," Lucas said, his voice grim. "But we have to be careful. If Victoria suspects we found them..." I nodded, wiping away the last of my tears. "We need to find my mother, Eleanor. She'll know what to do next." As we walked back to the farmhouse, the weight of our discoveries heavy between us, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the life I thought I'd had, anger at the lies I'd been told, but also a growing sense of purpose. My father and mother had sacrificed everything to expose this corruption. I owed it to them, and to myself, to see it through. That night, as Lucas and I sat at the kitchen table planning our next move, I felt a shift in our relationship. We were no longer just reluctant partners in an arranged marriage, or even friends united by a common goal. We were now co-conspirators in a dangerous game, with the fate of my family's legacy, and perhaps much more, hanging in the balance. "Whatever happens," Lucas said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "we're in this together. I won't let you face this alone." Looking into his eyes, I saw determination, loyalty, and something deeper that made my heart flutter, despite the gravity of our situation. I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. "Together," I agreed. As we sat there, surrounded by the documents that had turned my world upside down, I realized that the farm had become more than just a temporary prison or a place of hiding. It had become a crucible, forging me into someone stronger, someone ready to face the challenges ahead. With Lucas by my side and the truth finally in our grasp, I felt ready to take on Victoria, find my mother, and unravel the conspiracy that had shaped my entire life. The harvest was over, but our real work was just beginning. The days following our discovery became a blur of clandestine planning and barely contained anxiety. Lucas and I knew we were sitting on a powder keg of information, and one wrong move could blow everything apart. We needed to find my mother, Eleanor Marquez, but we had to be careful. Victoria's eyes seemed to be everywhere. It was during one of our late-night strategy sessions that we had our first real breakthrough. I was sifting through old photographs we'd found among the documents when something caught my eye. "Lucas, look at this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper despite us being alone in the farmhouse. He leaned in close, his warmth a comforting presence at my side. The photograph showed my father at what looked like a local farmer's market. But it was the woman in the background that had caught my attention, a striking Latina woman with my eyes, trying hard not to look directly at the camera. "That has to be her," I breathed. "My mother." Lucas studied the image intently. "The banner in the background, it's for the Millbrook Harvest Festival. That's just 2 towns over from here." A plan began to form in my mind. The current year's festival was just days away. If my mother had been keeping tabs on me all these years, as my father's letter suggested, there was a chance she might show up again. "We have to go," I said, determination filling my voice. Lucas nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "It's risky, Olivia. If Victoria finds out we're looking into your past..." "We'll be careful," I assured him, gripping his hand. "We'll go under the guise of selling some of the farm's produce. It's what everyone would expect us to do anyway." And so, our plan was set in motion. The next few days were a flurry of activity as we prepared for the festival, while also securing the incriminating documents. We decided to hide them in a new location, one that even Victoria would never think to look, buried beneath the floorboards of the old chicken coop, now used for storage. The morning of the festival dawned bright and crisp. As Lucas and I loaded our truck with crates of apples and pumpkins, I could feel the nervous energy thrumming between us. This wasn't just about finding my mother anymore. It was our first real act of rebellion against Victoria's machinations. The Millbrook Harvest Festival was a riot of color and activity. Cheerful bunting hung between stalls, selling everything from homemade pies to hand-knitted scarves. The air was thick with the scent of caramel apples and wood smoke. Under different circumstances, I might have found it charming. As Lucas set up our stall, I scanned the crowds, my heart racing every time I spotted a dark-haired woman of the right age. But hour after hour passed with no sign of Elena Marquez. It was late afternoon when Lucas touched my arm, nodding discreetly towards a figure moving through the crowd. My breath caught in my throat. It was her, older than in the photograph, with streaks of grey in her dark hair, but unmistakably the woman I'd seen in the picture. "Go," Lucas whispered. "I'll cover for you here." With shaking legs, I made my way through the festival goers, trying to keep my eyes on the woman who might be my mother. She moved with purpose, clearly heading somewhere specific. I followed her to a quiet area behind some craft stalls, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she must hear it. Finally, she stopped and turned, her eyes meeting mine. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, years of unspoken history hanging between us. "Olivia," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew you'd find me eventually." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Mom?" The word felt foreign on my tongue. Elena nodded, her own eyes glistening. "We don't have much time. Victoria has eyes everywhere. I've been waiting for you to discover the truth, but it's not safe to talk here." She pressed a small, folded piece of paper into my hand. "This is how you can contact me securely, but be careful, Mihisha. Victoria is more dangerous than you know." Before I could respond, she melted back into the crowd, leaving me standing there with a whirlwind of emotions and 1,000 unasked questions. I made my way back to our stall in a daze, clutching the paper like a lifeline. Lucas took one look at my face and knew. "You found her?" he asked quietly, as he handed a bag of apples to a customer. I nodded, unable to speak. Once the customer had moved on, I showed him the paper. It contained a series of numbers, a code of some kind. "We need to figure this out," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tonight." But as we began to pack up our unsold produce, a familiar voice sent a chill down my spine. "Well, isn't this quaint?" Victoria said, seemingly materializing out of nowhere. "I must say, Olivia, you've taken to this farm wife role with surprising enthusiasm." I forced a smile, praying she hadn't seen my encounter with Elena. "Victoria, what a surprise. What brings you to Millbrook?" Her eyes glittered dangerously. "Oh, just checking in on my favorite stepdaughter. Making sure you're not forgetting our arrangement." As Victoria engaged us in seemingly idle chit-chat, her gaze sharp and assessing, I could feel the weight of the coded message in my pocket. We had taken our first real step towards unraveling the conspiracy, but the game had suddenly become much more dangerous. That night, as Lucas and I huddled over the coded message in the safety of the farmhouse, I knew we had crossed a point of no return. We were no longer just playing defense. We were actively working to expose Victoria and the corrupt network she represented. "Whatever happens next," I said to Lucas, my voice low but determined, "we're in this together, right?" He took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Together," he agreed, "no matter what." As we bent our heads over the mysterious code, the first raindrops of an approaching storm pattered against the windows. It felt like an omen. The calm we'd known was coming to an end. The real storm was about to begin. The days following the Harvest Festival were a whirlwind of clandestine activity. Lucas and I spent every spare moment trying to decipher the code my mother had given me. We knew that cracking it was crucial to unraveling the larger conspiracy, but progress was frustratingly slow. Meanwhile, the farm demanded our attention more than ever. A particularly vicious storm had swept through the area, leaving destruction in its wake. Fields were flooded, fences were down, and the old barn roof had sprung several leaks. As we worked tirelessly to salvage what we could, I couldn't help but feel like the storm was a metaphor for our lives. Chaos swirling around us as we struggled to stay afloat. It was during one of these long, grueling days that we finally had our breakthrough with the code. We were in the barn, patching the roof, when Lucas suddenly froze, a look of revelation on his face. "Olivia," he said, excitement coloring his voice, "I think I've got it. The numbers, they're not just a code. They're coordinates." My heart raced as I climbed down the ladder to look at the paper he was holding. "Coordinates? To where?" Lucas pulled out his phone, quickly plugging in the numbers. "It's a location about 50 miles from here, in the mountains." I felt a surge of hope. A meeting place. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. I think so. But Olivia, if we go— I know, I said, understanding the unspoken concern in his voice. It's dangerous. Victoria could find out. But we have to take the risk. It might be our only chance to connect with my mother and get the full story. Lucas was quiet for a moment, then nodded firmly. All right, we'll go tomorrow. I'll tell Mike we're making a supply run to the city. He can watch the farm for a day. As we finished repairing the roof, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. We were taking a huge risk, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. The next morning dawned grey and misty, fitting our mood perfectly. As we set out in Lucas's old truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every car that passed us on the road seemed suspicious, every glance from a stranger potentially sinister. The drive took us deep into the mountains, along winding roads that seemed to get narrower and more treacherous with each passing mile. Finally, we arrived at what appeared to be an abandoned hiking trail. This is it, Lucas said, checking the coordinates one last time. The location is about a mile up this trail. As we hiked, the forest around us grew thicker, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under our feet and the occasional call of a bird. I was about to suggest we turn back when we rounded a bend and saw a small cabin nestled in a clearing. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw a figure standing on the porch. Eleanor, my mother. She beckoned us inside quickly, her eyes darting around as if expecting danger to materialize at any moment. Once inside, she enveloped me in a tight hug. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've waited so long for this moment." For a few precious minutes, we simply held each other, years of separation and unspoken words flowing between us. But all too soon, Elena pulled away, her expression turning serious. "We don't have much time," she said, gesturing for us to sit. "Victoria's network is vast and they're getting suspicious. We need to move quickly." Over the next hour, Elena filled in the gaps of the story we'd pieced together from my father's documents. The conspiracy went deeper than we'd imagined, involving not just corporate corruption, but high-level government officials as well. "Your father and I were close to exposing everything," Elena explained, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and sadness. "But they got to him before we could go public. His passing wasn't an accident, Olivia. And now they're after the evidence we collected." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "They killed him? But why didn't you come for me after?" Elena's face crumpled with guilt. "I wanted to, Mihija, but I had to go deep undercover. It was the only way to stay alive and keep working towards exposing the truth. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done." As Elena continued to explain the intricacies of the conspiracy and the danger we were all in, I felt Lucas's hand slip into mine, offering silent support. I squeezed back gratefully, drawing strength from his presence. Suddenly, Elena tensed, her gaze snapping to the window. "We've got company," she hissed, reaching for a hidden compartment under the floorboards. "They must have followed you." My blood ran cold as I saw a black SUV pulling up outside. Victoria stepped out, flanked by two menacing-looking men. "Olivia, Lucas, take this," Eleanor said urgently, pressing a flash drive into my hand. "It contains everything, all the evidence your father and I collected. Get it to the authorities, I'll hold them off." "No," I cried, unwilling to be separated from her again. "We can't leave you." But Lucas was already pulling me towards a back exit. "We have to go, Olivia. It's what she wants. It's what your father would have wanted." Tears streaming down my face, I allowed Lucas to lead me out into the forest, just as we heard the front door of the cabin burst open. We ran, our hearts pounding, the flash drive clutched tightly in my hand. It felt like we carried the weight of the world with us as we stumbled through the underbrush, the sounds of pursuit not far behind. As we finally reached the truck and sped away, I turned to Lucas, my voice shaking. "What do we do now?" His jaw was set, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "We finish this. For your parents. For the truth. We take that evidence to someone we can trust and blow this whole thing wide open." I nodded, feeling a new resolve steel itself in my chest. We had the truth now, and with it the power to bring down Victoria and the entire corrupt network she represented. As we drove back towards the farm, I knew that everything was about to change. The storm we'd been trying to weather was about to become a hurricane. But with Lucas by my side, and the strength I'd inherited from both my parents coursing through me, I was ready to face whatever came next. The final battle was just beginning, and this time, we had the upper hand. The drive back to the farm was tense, filled with furtive glances in the rearview mirror and hushed strategizing. The flash drive Elena had given us felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket, its contents potentially explosive enough to bring down an entire network of corruption. "We can't go back to the farm," Lucas said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It's the first place they'll look." I nodded, my mind racing. "We need to get this information to someone we can trust. Someone with the power to act on it." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Channel 7 news station. Ask for Jenna Reeves. Trust her. My heart leapt. Even in the chaos, Elena had managed to give us one last lifeline. "Lucas, change of plans. We're going to the city." The next few hours were a blur of backroads and nervous energy as we made our way to the Channel 7 news station in the heart of the city. As we walked into the bustling newsroom, I felt woefully out of place in my mud-stained jeans and flannel shirt. But there was no time for insecurity. "We need to speak with Jenna Reeves," I told the receptionist, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's urgent." Moments later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s appeared. "I'm Jenna Reeves. And you are?" "Olivia Hartley," I said, watching recognition flicker in her eyes. "I have information about a major corruption scandal involving Victoria Hartley and others. My mother, Elena Marquez, said we could trust you." Jenna's eyes widened, and she quickly ushered us into a private office. Over the next hour, Lucas and I laid out everything we knew, from my father's secret investigations to Victoria's manipulations and the contents of the flash drive. As Jenna reviewed the evidence, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is big," she said finally. "Bigger than anything I've ever covered. We need to move fast. I have contacts in the FBI who can help, but we need to get this information secure before Victoria and her associates can bury it." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Jenna made calls, set up secure servers, and arranged for FBI protection. All the while, Lucas and I sat in a daze, the reality of what we had set in motion finally sinking in. It was nearly dawn when Jenna finally turned to us, a look of determination on her face. "It's done. The FBI is moving on the information as we speak. Victoria and her associates are being brought in for questioning. But you two aren't safe yet. We need to get you to a secure location." As if to underscore her words, my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made my blood run cold. "Fire at local farm. Arson suspected." Lucas and I exchanged a horrified look. Our home, the place where we had found each other amidst all the chaos, was gone. Victoria's retaliation had been swift and merciless. The next few days passed in a blur of FBI interviews, news reports, and sleepless nights in a safe house. The story broke like a tidal wave, dominating every news channel and social media platform. Victoria's arrest made front-page news, her perfectly composed facade crumbling as she was led away in handcuffs. But amidst all the chaos, there was one piece of news that brought tears to my eyes. Elena had escaped. She was safe, working with the authorities to bring down the rest of the corrupt network. A week after our world had exploded, Lucas and I stood on a hilltop overlooking the remains of the farm. The fields were scorched, the farmhouse a burnt-out shell. Yet as I looked out over the land, I felt a strange sense of peace. "It's all gone," I said softly, leaning into Lucas's embrace. He tightened his arm around me. "Not everything. We still have each other. And the truth is finally out." I turned to face him, really looking at the man who had been my rock through all of this. The man I had been forced to marry, who had become my partner, my confidant. And now I realized with startling clarity the love of my life. "Lucas," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "I know our marriage started as a sham, but somewhere along the way..." He silenced me with a gentle kiss. "I know," he said softly. "I love you too, Olivia. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As we stood there surveying the ashes of our old life, I felt a surge of hope for the future. The truth had come at a heavy cost, but it had also set us free. Free to choose our own path, to rebuild on our own terms. In the distance, I could see the old oak tree where we had found my father's documents, still standing strong despite the fire. It was a reminder that some things endure, that even in the face of destruction, new life can take root. "So," Lucas said, a hint of his old humor returning to his voice. "Ready to start over? Maybe this time we can try our hand at organic farming. I hear it's all the rage in the city." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "As long as we're doing it together, I'm ready for anything." As we made our way down the hill hand in hand, I knew that this was just the beginning of our story. The conspiracy had been exposed. The truth had come to light. But our journey was far from over. There would be trials to face, a family to reconnect with, and a new life to build. But with Lucas by my side, and the strength I'd discovered within myself, I was ready to face whatever the future held. We had weathered the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the harvest of truth we had sown. The sun was setting as we reached the bottom of the hill, casting a golden glow over the land. It felt like a promise of brighter days to come. And as Lucas pulled me close for another kiss, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger for all we had endured. Our story, which had begun in deception and manipulation, had blossomed into something beautiful and true, and that, I realized, was the greatest harvest of all.